Let's scroll down a little bit more, and here there's another important feature that I must to explain to you. This is an advanced feature of mental ray. It's an advanced workflow actually, or technique, like you want to call it. It's the final gathering map. Usually I use the rebuild option enable. I show you where. Okay, you see, rebuild is on. This is under the final gathering map section. Let's see the tooltip, yeah. But you have other two choices, which is off and freeze. Usually the advanced technique is based on the freeze option. Now let's go back to the document and let's see what actually the freeze option does. So, if the rebuild option is on by default, any previously generated final gathering file map is ignored and all final gather points are recomputed. If this file is off, you remember the three options, no? On, off and freeze. If the option is off, final gather is forced to use the result from a previous final gather render. Existing final gather points are not recalculated, and any new final gather points are appended to the existing file. Let's see the freeze option. The freeze option stops any new data from being written to the final gather file. It is useful to reduce light flickering in your animation. If you are rendering out a still image, like actually my scene are usually stills, and are not changing the final gather settings, turn this attribute off to save rendering time. If you are rendering out a camera animation sequence, you may be able to use previous frames, final gathering results. That means you can turn this attribute off, depending on how the irradiance change during animation. However, if object in the scene move, this option must be on. So to show you this advanced final gathering map technique, which was used mostly and is still used to save time, because we will force mental ray to not recreate a new final gather map every time we render, but we will reuse a final gather map that we will create only once, this map. So we will just open a Maya scene, maybe a simple one, not the heavy one. So this is the scene, and open the render setting panel, select the indirect lighting tab and scroll down to the final gathering map section. Here, as you can see, is set to on by default. If you look at the tooltip, in the primary final gather file field there is use file as disk cache for storing and reusing the final gathering map. So what we will do, we will just input a directory where we want our FG map, I call it like this just for easy, which stands for final gathering map, and we will enable the off option, means we will set the rebuild of the final gathering map to off, to force mental ray to create once this map and not rebuild the map anymore. So just open the render view, and as you see I just testing this 1 minute ago. So just do a quick, but before to do the render region, I suggest myself to use one of the quick selection sets which I create for every scene in the tutorial. I right mouse click the quick selection set, and I select the select set members, which are the objects that we don't need to render for speed now, and just hide these objects then go back to the render view and render region. Now what we should do is to check the output window, what it says. Now it's render. You see, now it's calculating the importance, the final gather points, and I will show you that right now the final gather map is already created and is created on the desktop. So what I will do now is I press ESC to stop the render, because the final gather map is already created. For this little test to show you how it works is enough. But usually you should wait until the end, so all the final gather map is created. As you can see here, the output window say that the new final gather points are saved to the FG map, which was just created on the desktop. So now what we will do from now on, to save time mostly, so the final gather map will be not rebuilt every time we render. You can do this only when you are satisfied with the main lighting and you are planning not to change lights, and the scene must be a still scene. Okay, this is used, I was using this technique mostly with stills. You can use it also for animation to save time on frames, because the final gather map will be not rebuilt for every frame. Now, to force mental ray to absolutely don't write anymore any final gather map point, we set the rebuild option to freeze, because if we leave the off option, it will write other points. Every time we render, will write new points to the final gather map, which is saved, in my case, on the desktop, and the file will get larger and larger every time. So what we want is to keep the file on the initial size, so we set to freeze, and it will read the final gather map from the desktop. Okay, so this is just to show you the technique to make more fast the rendering. Now let's go back to the huge Maya scene that we was looking before, that we was checking before, sorry. Okay, here are all the settings of the final gather. Let's scroll down. We see already how this works, correct? Here I would like to draw your attention on the filter. Check the tooltip. Eliminate speckles caused by few extreme values. Okay, usually it's set by default to the value 0, but since these are very heavy scenes with plenty of mental ray features, lighting and rendering features, I actually use almost all the mental ray lighting and rendering features that I describe in the start of the introduction of this presentation. I prefer to use it to input the value 1, which helps to eliminate hot shots and speckles. Okay, let's call it shots of light, okay, bright spots, and it converges to a smoother solution. I suggest not to increase further this value, because if not, the final gathering solution will be not very accurate. Okay, so 1 in my usually workflow is the maximum. Now let's scroll down a little bit more, and in the final gathering tracing, which is the equivalent, the corresponding values which are set, which we saw before under the quality section. Scroll down under the quality section, under the ray tracing section, you see reflection, refraction and max stress depth. These are the corresponding values you see, that are used by the final gathering solution, okay, feature, mental ray feature. As you see before, on extreme scenes like mine, my workflow is many users, powerful Maya and mental ray users, used to input the same values, which are input here. In this case, under the quality tab, I input 4, 4, and 8. But I used to use half of the values, means I input half of the values which are input under the quality tab. So for the final gathering tracing reflection, I set input the value 2, for the refraction the input 2, and for the max trace depth I input the value 4. And from the tooltip you will see maximum overall number of recursion for final gather tracing. Now, mental ray will read the final gather map every time you render without adding any new final gather points. Okay, so let's check if on the desktop there is this map. Here it is. Let's see the size. Should be very small size because we interrupt the render very early, only 120 bytes. Okay.